welcome to this very interesting Pandesal Forum here at the 84-year-old Kamuning Bakery Cafe. Please be ready with your questions. Our panelists here are among the top intellectual heavyweights in the Philippines today and nationalist analysts also. And we will discuss the burning issues which should be tackled by everyone. Among the topics to be discussed here, the geopolitics situation of the Philippines and Southeast Asia, the proposed 4 new EDCA military bases of the U.S. in addition to the existing 5 EDCA military bases. Later on, I will introduce every panelist. I will just mention them quickly. We have a very distinguished list of panelists headed by retired American Colonel Ann Wright. She is in the U.S. now, but will join us via Zoom in a few minutes. And then beside me here, we have former Department of Foreign Affairs Undersecretary, former presidential spokesperson of President Duterte, and also 2022 presidential candidate Ernesto Abella. And then beside him is, we have another speaker via Zoom, Mr. Wilson Fortaleza, I'll introduce later on, and Mr. Herman Laurel. And we have, of course, the fearless intellectual and also TV host, Ms. Sass Rogando Sasot. And last but not the least, Professor Anna Malindog-Uy. Today we'll start with the opening statements of our distinguished panelists. First is a very respected international anti-war and peace advocate. She is retired Colonel of the U.S., Miss Dr. Ann Wright. Dr. Ann Wright served 29 years in the United States Army and Army Reserves and retired with the rank of colonel. She was a U.S. diplomat for 16 years and served in USA embassies in Nicaragua, Grenada, Somalia, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Sierra Leone, Micronesia, Afghanistan, and Mongolia. Colonel Ann Wright resigned from the U.S. government diplomatic service 20 years ago in March 2003 in opposition to the controversial U.S. war on Iraq. Since her resignation, Colonel Ann Wright has worked for peaceful resolution to conflicts through Veterans for Peace, Code Pink Women for Peace, No to NATO, and the International Peace Bureau, which is a Nobel Peace Prize winning NGO. She has been on peace delegations to Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iran, Yemen, Gaza, North Korea, Russia, China, and many other countries. Colonel Dr. Ann Wright now lives in Honolulu, Hawaii, site of the headquarters of the U.S. military's Indo-Pacific Command. She is a leader of the Oahu Water Protectors, along with several other environmental and civic groups, which forced the U.S. military to close down 20 massive underground jet fuel storage tanks, which leaked 19,000 gallons of jet fuel into the drinking well of 93,000 people on the island of Oahu in Hawaii in November 2021. She tracks the toxic pollution of U.S. military bases on civilian communities near military bases around the Pacific. She has a very long biodata. I will make it very short and summarize it. In 2007, Dr. Ann Wright was awarded the U.S. Peace Prize by the U.S. Peace Memorial Foundation for her courageous anti-war activism, inspirational peace leadership, and her selfless citizen diplomacy. Let us welcome Dr. Ann Wright of the International Peace Bureau. Ma'am, welcome.
Thank you. Well, it's a pleasure to be with you, and thank you for organizing this webinar, this conference on such a very important topic, with the United States and the Philippines government now coming to yet one more agreement, and as you mentioned, with 5 new military bases that the U.S. will have access to. As you can see on the background, and as you mentioned, I live in Honolulu, Hawaii, which is the headquarters of the Indo-Pacific Command, the United States military command that has military cooperation, so to speak, with countries all throughout the Pacific and in many countries in Asia. The whole issue of the expansion of the U.S. military again into the Philippines, where the United States will have a minimum of 500 U.S. military at all times in the Philippines, and will continue and expand the large number of military exercises, war games, war practice that the United States has been having in a smaller scale with the Philippines over the years, but it's going to expand enormously now. As you mentioned from my background, we're very concerned, of course, about the militarization of the whole Pacific and of Asia. And one of the things that I do want to mention to you all, since you'll be having even more U.S. military coming, is this whole issue of contamination and pollution, which you certainly know from the large numbers of mega bases that the United States military had in the Philippines until 30 years ago. The whole issue of jet fuel pollution, of PFAS, which is rampant in virtually every military base, that contaminates the civilian environment around these military bases, is very important. I'll also just mention in the beginning here, and we can expand later, but you have such a wonderful array of speakers, my goodness. But when we look at the whole region, we look at South Korea, where the United States has expanded its military exercises with South Korea after a hiatus with the Trump administration not doing those exercises. We look at Japan and the new agreements the United States has with Japan, and the poor little island of Okinawa, which continues to host such a large number of U.S. military there. We keep going down further south to Guam, that has the newest Marine base in the world. It's the first time in 70 years, or 50 years, that the Marine Corps has increased its number of bases. We go further off into the Pacific, and we look at the Federated States of Micronesia, Marshall Islands, and Palau, all of which are renegotiating the Compact of Free Association. And to their credit, they are holding the U.S. government accountable. And for the opportunity, so to speak, to undercut the sovereignty of those 3 countries, the United States is going to be paying a lot more to those countries for the defense, military rights, space, land and sea, military rights in the Federated States of Micronesia, the Marshall Islands, which has Kwajalein missile test site, and Palau. So that, plus the United States opening a U.S. embassy in the Solomon Islands after having not have had one for 30 years because of the Solomon Islands having a military compact or a security compact with China. All of this is really increasing, ramping up the U.S. militarism in Asia and the Pacific. I thank you again very much for the opportunity to be with you today, and I look forward to all of the comments that those speakers that you have, the wonderful array of speakers that you have, will be speaking. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Colonel Ann Wright, for your opening statement. We'd like to ask your opinions later on about other issues. Thank you very much for your being here. Next, we have Ernesto Abella. one of the top statesmen in the Philippines, former Department of Foreign Affairs Undersecretary, former 2022 presidential candidate, former popular presidential spokesperson of former President Rodrigo Duterte. He was educated in the top schools in the Philippines, Silliman University, Ateneo de Davao University, including Asian Institute of Management for graduate studies. Welcome, Mr. Ernesto Abella, for your opening statement.
Thank you. Hello. Yeah. I'd like to begin with regarding the issue of averting a Ukraine scenario in the Philippines by responding from the lens of national policy as documented in the National Security Policy 2017-2022, which states its national security vision as a safe and secure Philippines at peace with itself and its neighbors, where its citizens are allowed to reach their full potential through the promotion of social justice and harmony, political stability, sound environmental management, and economic progress. The said document defines national security as the state or condition wherein the nation's sovereignty and territorial integrity, the people's well-being, core values, way of life, and the state and its institutions are protected and enhanced. A vital and intrinsic component of national security are our national interests, conditions which we consider to be desirable or essential to the unity, survival, and well-being of the country and its people, and how we view these interests in the hierarchy of our national priorities. Of the 9 priorities that the policy describes, the following are relevant to the issue that we are discussing. Number 1, protection of the freedom and public safety and welfare of the people. Number 2, preservation of the sovereignty and integrity of the national territory. Number 3, pursuit of independent foreign policy in the exercise of national sovereignty and self-determination. Number 4, protection of the Filipino public from criminality, illegal drugs, pandemics, cyber attacks, and weapons of mass destruction. Number 5, freedom from any forms of nuclear weapons within the Philippine territory. Number 6, protection and preservation of ecological balance. Of our 9 conditions for preserving and protecting Philippine national interests, 6 of these are either directly or indirectly affected by the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, or EDCA, that President Benigno Aquino III entered with the United States in 2014. Quoting political commentator Tiglao in his August 2022 Manila Times column, he said, "Unthinkable just a decade ago, more and more experts on geopolitics are now saying that the People's Republic of China would likely invade and move to occupy its territory called Taiwan sooner rather than later, triggering a war between the Asian superpower and the US." In January of this year, 2023, a conservative Washington-based media outlet reports that 4-star Air Force General Michael Minahan sent a memo to his officers informing them of his belief that conditions will be ripe for war for Chinese leader Xi Jinping in 2025. While a defense official responded that the general's opinions are not representative of the department's view, he goes on to say that the national defense strategy that is of the US makes clear that China is the pacing challenge for the Department of Defense, and our focus remains in working alongside, please take note, alongside allies and partners to preserve a peaceful, free, and open Indo-Pacific. As the Manila Times columnist put it, we ants have to play it safe to be sure not to get involved in this battle of elephants that could crush us. However, current developments like the EDCA base's expansion unequivocally places the Philippines on the side of the US in the strategic competition for dominance with China. What happens next depends on two things. Number one, how the U.S. moves in response to China's long game. And number two, how we, the Philippines, acts and exercises agency in the short, medium, and long term. Question, what could possibly lie behind the EDCA base's establishment and expansion? In a recent commentary by Greg Polling of Washington-based think tank CSIS, he states that the geographic locations of the new EDCA bases will be telling. It's the location, he says. And there are two that are quite significant. Number one, Subic Bay, and number two, Cagayan Province in the north. While the original EDCA mission covered disaster relief, maritime security and counterterrorism, and Army and Air Force cooperation, the new additions, that's four, but significant are two, would include Navy and Marine cooperation. He adds, and as Manila pursues a more equal and therefore more resilient alliance with the United States, these sentences are rather significant. He says, the Philippines will have to accept reciprocal obligations. U.S. forces cannot be expected to defend Filipinos in the South China Sea without at least the possibility of Philippine support in crises elsewhere in the region. In other words, there is a quid pro quo, the something for something. If we expect the United States to help us in our West Philippine Sea counter terrorism and disaster, then we need to be ready not just to supply the physical locations for U.S. assets, equipment, and personnel, which apparently will be limited considering the modest appropriation for such. The Filipinos will need to be ready to fight for America in defense when they pitch battles in the region. In other words, that means Taiwan. It is not so much, therefore, the apparent dangers of limited nuclear attacks against the bases, nor the moral deterioration, but some people say like prostitution, but that we could be dragged into a proxy war in behalf of the U.S. in their fight to ensure their dominance in the region. I'm sorry. All right, I'm sorry. It is not so much the apparent dangers of limited nuclear attacks against the bases, nor the moral deterioration, but that we could be dragged into a proxy war in behalf of the U.S. in their fight to ensure their dominance in the region, therefore endangering freedom, welfare, and public safety of Filipinos, endangering our independent foreign policy, the exercise of national sovereignty and self-determination, endangering the Filipino public from cyber attacks and weapons of mass destruction, endangering our freedom from any forms of nuclear weapons in the Philippine territory. Therefore, to avert the Ukraine scenario in the Philippines, we need to, as the National Security Policy Statement says, effectively use its instruments of national power. I will cover three and then I'm done. In the short term, we need to exercise political and legal power. The legislative needs to clarify the areas and limits of our mutual cooperation with any state, considering that we are prisoners of our geography. Either we are an American warship or a pearl in the Chinese first island chain. Two, subset. It is an imperative that civil society and the public insist that the legislative and executive offices ensure protection of our national interests rather than choose sides to support. Number two, diplomatic instrument. Foreign policy, which is a domestic policy expressed abroad, needs to maintain national sovereignty and independence even as it seeks to sustain both powers as our reliable trading partners to build regional partnerships and allies. Subset, the Philippines can encourage an asymmetric competition tactics from the U.S. and avoid overly hawkish approaches like containment and rollback, and avoid head-to-head competition against China's initiatives lest we become collateral damage. In other words, we exercise certain diplomatic bridging. And number two, to strengthen relations with regional partners like the ASEAN. Number three, information. Now more than ever, strategic communication, especially public diplomacy, both here and abroad, is essential to engage our publics, both to strengthen the resolve of citizens and to turn disinterested parties into allies. It is equally important for us to have a real understanding of the intentions of the main actors in this competition so that we can respond appropriately. In the medium term, we need to develop a confident national identity through trustworthy social units and institutions, meaning to say culture and values education. Essential to the resiliency of Ukraine has been a sense of patriotism, because beyond the hardware supplied by outside forces, it has been the Ukrainian national identity and fighting spirit that has allowed them to survive and flourish, in spite of. We need therefore to inspire the Filipino people to exercise both human and moral agency to determine our perceived inadequacies. In the long term, we need to renew and rewrite our social contract so that those who govern, in spite of our flawed presidential structure, must ensure the citizenry that public well-being will always be a priority, integrity of execution, and sustainability of plans and purposes. To summarize, to avert the Ukraine situation in the Philippines, we need the government, in concert with an enlightened private sector and a citizenry with confident national identity, to exercise agency and assert a national security policy that will protect us externally and internally. That means to say the well-being of all Filipinos, that will not compromise our right to determine what is ultimately beneficial for us, that will not drag us into a war which is not of our own making, and that we can help build a more just and equitable world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ernesto Abella, for your thought-provoking ideas and analysis. Later on, he will answer questions along with the other panelists. Next, for the opening statement, we have invited a top-notch geopolitics analyst, nationalist intellectual, book author, social media celebrity, also host of the Statecraft TV show with SMNI News. Ms. Sass Rogando Sasot has been educated in Europe, of course in the Philippines also. She has master's degree in international relations from Leiden University. She earned her BA combined major in world politics and global justice, minor in international development, magna cum laude honors from Leiden University. She also studied her BA in business administration in human resource management from the Open University of Hong Kong, plus etc. She has a very long biodata, but I have just summarized just some of the highlights. Let us welcome the highly respected and fearless Ms. Sass Rogando Sasot.
Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. I am speaking today as a citizen of the Philippines. I am speaking today as a Filipino whose identity is rooted in centuries of subjugation from the Kingdom of Spain, the United States of America, and Japan. An identity that flourished through the freedom fought by our ancestors against these colonizers. I am speaking today as an Asian, fully embracing our amazing pre-colonial history and the contribution of our diverse cultures and civilizations to humanity. And I am speaking today as an international relations scholar. In the 2022 presidential elections, I was known as an ardent supporter of President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. Just like in 2016, when I supported President Rodrigo Duterte, the primary reason why I supported President Marcos Jr. is his foreign policy. However, I do not support the recent foreign policy maneuver of President Marcos Jr. This is a complete reversal of what he promised during the 2022 presidential one-on-one interview with Boy Abunda on January 25, 2022. Mr. Abunda asked him if he would invite the United States to get involved and help us in our dispute with China. President Marcos Jr. Categorically said, no, the problem is between China and us. If the Americans come in, it is bound to fail. Let me repeat that. I didn't invent this. He said this. No, the problem is between China and us. If the Americans come in, it is bound to fail. On February 2, 2023, the Philippines and the United States entered into agreement to expand U.S. access to military bases in our country under the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, or EDCA, which was concluded in 2014 under President Benigno Aquino Jr. Under Aquino's EDCA, the U.S. military was given access to 5 EDCA facilities. Now, under Marcos Jr., the U.S. military was given access to 4 more. Aquino Marcos, the irony of history. The U.S. State Department said that these four more bases, quote, will allow more rapid support for humanitarian and climate-related disasters in the Philippines and respond to other shared challenges, end quote. It sounds very benign. But who are they fooling? The U.S. government-funded Public Broadcasting Service, or PBS, reported on February 2, 2023, that, quote, this move is aimed at confronting China and its focus on Taiwan, which is only a few hundred miles from one of the new locations where U.S. forces will likely operate, and that is in Cagayan. End quote. A joint report by a former Pentagon correspondent and a diplomatic correspondent wrote in the New York Times, also on February 2, 2023, quote, U.S. officials say they are preparing to surge forces in the event of conflict with China, including over Taiwan. End quote. If you are very observant, you will notice what is kept being repeated and emphasized in Western media. Taiwan, confronting China, conflict with China. And there is a reason for that. Taiwan is in the middle of the defensive perimeter of the United States in the Pacific Theater, which runs from the Kuril Islands to Japan, Philippines, all the way to the Malay Peninsula. I didn't invent this. This is real. Okay? To understand how important Taiwan is in the defensive perimeter of the United States, take a stick and cut the middle. What would happen? The rest would fall. to fully understand current U.S. posturing in our region, one must read the 2022 National Security Strategy of the United States. And they just released this in October 2022. Okay, very new. In Part 3, page 23 of the National Security Strategy of the United States, it clearly states that their global priority is to outcompete China and constrain Russia. I think all of us here are old enough, no? To be able to remember the national security strategy before of George W. Bush, yung kanyang axis of evil, no? Now this is mirroring it, no? And now outcompete China and constrain Russia. Okay? We already know what we're doing with Russia, no? In page 24 of the section on China, the National Security Strategy of the United States gave an exact number of years, 10. Let me quote it. In the competition with the People's Republic of China, as in other arenas, it is clear that the next 10 years will be the decisive decade. We stand now at the inflection point where the choices we make and the priorities we pursue today will set us on course that determines our competitive position long into the future. End quote. I think that's very self-explanatory. Okay? Taiwan is a U.S. priority. And before I continue this, so anyone who's dreaming that the Philippines is a U.S. priority or the Kalayaan Island Group is a U.S. priority, you will never find it in the national security strategy of the United States. Nada. You can find there a sentence about the Philippines, but nothing about extending the MDT to the Kalayaan Island Group. But you can find a sentence there that the United States is extending its mutual security pact all the way to the Senkaku Island. So wag na tayong magbobula-bulahan dito, no? Na para ito sa South China Sea and Kalayaan Island Group. Walang ganon. Actually true. So Taiwan is a U.S. priority. They have quote, they have an abiding interest in maintaining peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait, which is critical to regional and global security and prosperity and a matter of international concern and attention. The operative word is critical to regional and global security. Of course, this is just a euphemism to the security of the United States because it is the defensive perimeter of the United States. So what is actually being foreseen by the United States that could happen in the Taiwan Strait within 10 years? So 10 years, ha? Ito, nakalagay din doon. Changes in the status quo. So what are the changes in the status quo that the United States cannot accept? Either mainland China gains full control of Taiwan, or Taiwan becomes independent. So either of these two, the U.S. won't accept. It's in their national security strategy. Okay? So whatever that means, as the United States, okay? Or our foreign policy decision makers in this country, no, ask naman difficult questions to those people. Huwag na yung mga pakyut-pakyut. Or better yet, ask President Marcos Jr. He is the chief architect of our foreign policy. Let him interpret this for us. Now let me continue. But let us put this in a larger context. Okay? The national security strategy of the United States. In the discussion going on in the national security community in the United States, okay? Anong nangyayari? sa greater national security community ng United States. I will highlight several important ones. Yung iba dito sinabi na ni former Secretary Abella. Okay. In October 2022, the same month that the National Security Strategy was released, U.S. State Department Secretary Antony Blinken declared that China has made a decision to seize Taiwan on a, quote, much faster timeline, end quote. Number 2, on February 2, during an event at Georgetown University, okay, just this February 2, CIA Director William Burns said, and I quote, "We know as a matter of intelligence that Xi Jinping has instructed the People's Liberation Army to be ready by 2027 to conduct a successful invasion of Taiwan." End quote. Number 3, on January 31, a leaked memo of a U.S. Air Force General Mike Minihan was emailed to airmen under his command, instructing them to prepare for war because, quote, his guts, end quote, tell him they will fight in 2025, end quote. So these estimates are within the 10-year period that is in the national security strategy of the United States. Okay, so they would like to, they will go to war.
Yes.
The question is when. Oh, that's the important question. It's no longer there's no longer doubt that the United States will go to war against China. The question is when. And now, we have an important study conducted by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, or CSIS, released on January 9, 2023. Diba, sunod-sunod yung mga ano nila, no? Leading to the EDCA. Okay. So, itong CSIS, this is a bipartisan think tank based on Washington, D.C. Okay? This is not left-leaning. Pero, if you're going to read everything of analysis of what's going on, there is a confluence of right-leaning and left-leaning analysis of what will happen in our region. Okay? So, anong nakalagay dito sa, ano ba tong report ng CSIS? Okay? The report is entitled, The First Battle of the Next War. O, di ba? War gaming a Chinese invasion of Taiwan. So, wina-war game na nila. Okay? Okay? The military know what war gaming is. Okay? And everyone who studied international relations, knows what war gaming is. I really don't you media, you should know what war gaming is and how important this is. Okay? Baka maiyak na ako dito. Okay. Ito ang nakalagay, sabi ng CSIS sa kanyang release, nung re-release niya itong report noong January 9, 2023. CSIS said, okay, quote, "What was once unthinkable, direct conflict between the United States and China, has now become a commonplace discussion in the national security community, okay, of the United States. Please understand what that means." Okay? Before, people are saying na, no, China and the United States will not go to war over Taiwan. Okay? May mga duda pa, may doubts. Ngayon, wala na yung doubts. Ang question na lang ay when. Okay? And now, the CSIS project designed a war game to model what would be the result of a possible Chinese invasion of Taiwan in 2026. So, pasok pa din to sa 10-year period ng national security strategy ng United States. Ngayon, ang resulta ng kanilang war game model ay ito. If the invasion happens in 2026, they're considering the capabilities of China in 2026. Quote, China will fail to gain control of Taiwan. The United States and its allies will lose dozens of ships, hundreds of aircraft, and tens of thousands of servicemen, members. Taiwan will saw its economy devastated. Further, the high losses will damage the U.S. global position for many years. China will lose heavily and might destabilize the Chinese Communist Party rule. End quote. Siyempre, hindi naman niya in-advocate na let's not go to war. No? So, ang sabi naman nung report, the CSIS war game model then suggested that, quote, victory is not enough. The United States needs to strengthen deterrence immediately. End quote. Okay. To those who don't understand this international relations term, deterrence is to use the threat of force to discourage someone from doing something you don't want them to do. Okay? Maraming iba't ibang uri ng deterrence. I don't want to burden you with a lecture on international relations. You know? And this is often done through a show of force. Okay? In the CSIS War Game Report, one of the necessary conditions, okay, one of the necessary conditions for China to lose, okay, is this. There is no Ukraine model for Taiwan. What does it mean? It means that if war breaks out, and if the United States decides to defend Taiwan, U.S. forces must quickly engage in direct combat. Okay? U.S. forces must quickly engage in direct combat. Ano ibig sabihin nito? In other words, U.S. will need to send boots on the ground and not just send arms to Taiwan. So parang Vietnam, no? Ginawa nila sabi, Iraq, Vietnam,
Afghanistan.
diba? Lahat ng may boots on the ground sila. But let me digress a bit. You know, although I am speaking in this forum with the title, Averting a Ukraine Scenario in the Philippines, I don't think that this is appropriate to describe the danger we are facing as a country. It's different from Ukraine. It's an alluring analogy, but it is different. This is far more dangerous.
Yes. Yes. That's
Our situation is far more dangerous than Ukraine. Okay? As I mentioned earlier, the key to success of the United States against China is to avert a Ukraine scenario in Taiwan, which means na kailangan nila mag-engage ng direct combat, no? And not just mag-send lang ng weapons, salapi, at hayaan nila yung mga Taiwanese na makipag-away sa mainland China. Hindi po pwede daw yun. Okay? So I think you now understand why the United States wanted access to 4 more bases in our country. Okay? And one of them is close to Taiwan. Cagayan.
yes.
I don't think sa Cagayan lang yan. Diba? Anyone who knows military strategy, look at the coastline in the north.
Yes.
Actually, you can already know kung saan nila pwedeng ilagay dyan yung mga bases. Just look at of how the Japanese attack the Philippines from Formosa. Okay? And the direction. They would still probably use that same route.
Yeah.
Hindi lang Cagayan. Huwag tayong magbobulahan dito. Okay? So, let me just further emphasize some important aspects of that war game report. 1, the only combatants there are Japan, Taiwan, United States versus China. Wala yung Philippines dun sa war game report nila. Hindi tayo kasali. I-explain ko later kung bakit hindi pa nila tayo sinasali doon. And North Korea doesn't join the conflict. Wala ring North Korea factor. So yung casualties nila dito, it's still a very conservative estimate. No? Can you imagine combatants mo lang Japan, Taiwan, United States versus China? And two, this is the most relevant to us. According to the report, yung kanilang war game doon, the Philippines is neutral.
Neutral pa lang nila.
Hindi. The Philippines is neutral and doesn't allow basing. Access to base in our territory. Do you know what was their basis for this war game report? Whose foreign policy?
Yes.
They based this on Duterte's foreign policy. I didn't invent this.
Yeah.
It is in the report.
NINS.
But they have an alternative scenario in the Philippines. Okay? Sabi nila, pero may alternative scenario. Okay? Na ang Philippines mag-a-allow ng basing sa atin. Okay? Basing in our territory. Especially a site near to Taiwan. So this is what is happening now under the BBM administration.
Yes.
We are now in the alternative scenario of the war game report of CSIS.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah.
So what does this mean to us? Okay? Siyempre, quote na naman ako ng mga Amerikano, no? No? Kasi they're so honest. I can't believe. Ang naabutan ko lang namang gera, Iraq War ng major ng Amerika. So, this is the honesty right now is the same honesty that they had during the invasion of Iraq in 2003. Ito, let me quote the answer of Zach Cooper of the American Enterprises Institute. Isa na naman itong think tank based in Washington, D.C. Right-leaning naman to. Okay? Ngayon, nung interview niya, February 2, 2023, with government-funded PBS, the Public Broadcasting System, Zach Cooper was asked, quote, how will the U.S. use these military bases in the Philippines with the goal of confronting China's influence in the region? End quote. This is a government-funded channel in the United States. Ganun yung question. Di ba wala nang kaabog-abog, di ba? Hindi na to katulad ng mga journalists na nag-ask us doon na pa-sweet.
Diretso na.
May mga pa humanitarian climate change at chuchu. Ano yan? Saan ka nakakita ng military deployment for climate change? Tayo ba ang kauna-unang bansang lulubog sa climate change? Hindi. At kailangan ba natin ng help? Is our humanitarian disaster response system during typhoon is in disarray?
That's actually the case.
So Zach Cooper, the one from the American Enterprise Institute, answered, quote, I think, you need to watch this. Nakakatawa. He was so gentle, okay? I think the objective here is to provide new assets where the United States can place its forces so they are not so focused on just a few bases in East Asia. Okay? Right now, the United States really uses Okinawa and Guam as its main operating locations. And being able to diversify away from just a couple of locations makes the targeting challenge much more difficult for China, end quote. So kung makikita nyo yung mga release ng mga Western media, meron sila kasing
Playbook?
No, infographics. In infographic nila itong war game. Kung ano yung aatakihin ng China. So syempre, yung war game, ang original lang doon, Japan and United States and Taiwan. So ang nakalagay doon na inaatake, Okinawa and Guam. So remember, how did this guy, American, called us? New assets?
New assets.
New assets. Do you know what the United States called us
Yeah.
when they took us from Spain? Real estate. Tawag sa ating new assets for the United States that will give China a much more difficult, quote, targeting challenge, unquote.
Yeah.
So what does it mean? No, papaliwanag ko. Again, American source, napaka-honest kasi sila eh. Tayo lang yung tarantadong sinungaling. The article of the New York Times is so brutally honest. Quote, in any war, operational and supply bases would be among the first targets an enemy would try to strike. End quote. Now, Jacob Stokes, a senior fellow in the Indo-Pacific Security Program at the Center for a New American Society and an advisor to Mr. Biden when he was vice president, was quoted in this New York Times article. Okay? He explained this targeting
Targeting supply area.
no, that the Philippines will be used as a targeting
Yes, it is.
area. Ito ha, itong mismong sinabi niya ha, quote, if China is going to try to take steps with its missile arsenal to take out locations where the U.S. projects forces, it now has more targets. It has now more targets it would have to deal with. End quote. This is the article of the New York Times when BBM approved those 4 more bases.
Yeah, yeah.
Hindi sa akin to. Sa mga Amerikano to. Hindi rito sa mga makakaliwa.
No.
At former advisor ni Biden. Oh, dahil marami na tayo, marami ng target ang China. So crudely speaking, we are another target for China in order to exhaust its missile arsenal. Ano pa bang logical conclusion dun? So, can President Marcos Jr. tell us how many of us will die?
Yeah.
Okay? How our economy would look like after the dust settled. Okay? How are we going to rebuild this republic? Aren't we supposed to be having a public debate whether this is a future we want to have for our country?
Yes. Supposedly. Yeah.
Does President Marcos Jr. have the guts to stand up to the United States of America and say, no, I will not allow the Philippines to be used in your war?
Yeah.
Shouldn't the Congress
Yeah.
be intervening about this now?
Yes.
Now let me end by highlighting the following numbers. 2025, 2026, 2027, within 10 years. These are the supposed estimated timeframes China would decide to change the status quo by gaining full control of Taiwan. This is according to the United States. These are also the timeframes, remember this, these are also the timeframes when the United States could still win against China,
Yeah.
though with heavy losses. Okay? Longer than this, the higher the cost.
Yes.
And the less certain is the victory of the United States against China.
Yes.
So anong ibig sabihin nito? Anong ibig sabihin ng mga numerong ito? Okay? So what does this remind you? Doesn't this evoke you of the moment when US President George W. Bush tried to convince Americans to gain domestic support for a preventive war against Iraq in 2003? Let me remind you of what George W. Bush Jr. said during that time. Quote, "Facing clear evidence of peril, we cannot wait for the final proof, the smoking gun that could come in the form of a mushroom cloud." End quote. Hindi na raw siya maghihintay ng final proof. Invade na. War na against Iraq. And what do you call that? That's what you call a preventive war. And the United States has not abandoned its preventive war doctrine that George W. Bush Jr. instituted. Yes. So the question is the United States already convinced, okay, that it is facing a clear evidence of peril that China will gain full control of Taiwan by military force? Is the United States still waiting for a final proof that China will really do it? May history prove me wrong that US and China will go to war in the time frame US personalities provided. Mamili na lang kayo dyan, 25, 26, 27. Or but within 10 years, ano ba ngayon? 33. Yun ang pinaka-liberal, 33.
Matagal na yun.
Okay? May history prove me wrong that we will be another battleground in a war that is not of our own making. May history prove me wrong that we are once again trapped in the US web of either you are with them or against them. Tinatanong, alam mo yung nagsimula ako nag-post ito, sinasabi sa akin, sino pipiliin mo, China or US? Hindi kailangan natin piliin ang US. This is American propaganda at work at you.
Yes. Yes.
The choice is not between China or the United States, but between being a pawn
Yeah.
and being a sovereign.
State. Yeah. Actually.
In the Spanish-American War, did we have a choice? In the US-Japan War, did we have a choice? Hindi, syempre, colony tayo nun eh. Colony pa ba tayo ng United States para hindi tayo mamili na, oy, kayo na lang magpatayan. You know, heroes are often those who emerge triumphant after a tragedy. But the greater hero is the one who prevented a tragedy from happening in the first place. So, Mr. President, be that hero for our country.
Amazing, thought-provoking, very enlightening analysis and revelations. Thank you, Ms. Sass Rogando Sasot. Thank you very much for your courage and analysis. Next, we'd like to have for opening statement. Later on, we'd like to ask more questions. But what she has said should be spread and shared to many people. Next, we'd like to invite via Zoom, we have Mr. Wilson Fortaleza. He is a spokesperson of the Partido Manggagawa, which is Filipino language for Workers' Party. He is a peace advocate and a social activist. Let us welcome Mr. Wilson Fortaleza to give an opening statement.
Maraming salamat. Maraming salamat. No? It's really very nice to attend this kind of forum, and I think I'm very glad to listen to the previous speakers. Ngayon ko lang actually narinig yung ilang mga eksaktong wording sa ating national foreign relations policies 2017 as discussed earlier by Secretary Abella and propounded by the last speaker, Ms. Sasot. Ang hirap unawain yung ating foreign policy because in the first place the working class or any part of the Philippine citizenry were never asked ano ba dapat talaga ang foreign policy natin. So ito ay ginawa ng mga experts, hindi rin naman in-inform mga ating taong bayan ano nga ba ang ibig sabihin ng itong foreign policies natin ngayon. But we in the working class movement has our own position as regards to war, no? Alam po naman natin at ito ay hindi masyadong nadi-discuss sa mga national fora or even in international fora. What are the real implications of war, no? Hindi natin nababanggit na sa napakaraming giyera, no? Sa napakaraming nagdaang giyera, may dalawa tayong world wars. Before that, prior to that, we have national wars that killed millions of people. And that millions of people are mostly the soldiers and the working class who were mobilized to fight that wars in the battlefront. Hindi naman namamatay yung mga heads of states, hindi naman namamatay yung mga generals who planned for that war. Ang namamatay ay mga ordinaryong sundalo, ordinaryong manggagawa na minobilize sa giyera, no? Sa giyerang hindi rin nila alam kung bakit at ano ito. No? Whether it is a national war, whether it is a war imposed by imperial powers, lagi namang sundalo at mga taong minomobilize sa giyera ang nasa front line. At it is not in the immediate or in the long-term interest of the working class to fight the war. And I will quote Ms. Sasot sa binanggit na kanina, war that is not our own war. Hindi natin ito giyera yan. Hindi natin ito giyera. No, naninitiling tama yung sinulat ng isang military journalist, writer natin, si Auschwitz, di ba? Na war is simply an extension of politics. So the question is, how to avert a Ukraine scenario war in the Philippines? Wala po kaming sagot doon. Kasi hindi naman tayo ang mag-decide. Tama si Sasot kanina. Hindi naman tayo ang nagdi-decision sa giyera. Politics is not in our hands. The working class are powerless to decide about this kind of politics. So kung mayroon mang mangyayari, whoever pulls the trigger, either it's the US or it's China, walang kinalaman ng taong bayan kung ano ang mangyayari sa decision hindi naman nila ginagawa. Madadamay ba tayo? Of course. No? Madadamay ang Pilipinas sa giyera between the US and China because we are tied with so many military obligations with the US. Andiyan pa yung ating mga military agreements. Andiyan pa yung recent, no, after the military basis agreement, yung EDCA, yung DFA ay nandyan. So madadamay tayo. Huwag nating sabihin hindi tayo madadamay. So I will reserve my opinion on what China thinks about going to war with US. Meron siyang sariling problema at meron siyang sariling politika dito dahil sa claim nila sa Taiwan. Other than that, meron siyang piniklaim, no, na West Philippine Sea, no, na mayroong kaugnayan sa economic interest niya. Napakaraming langis, napakaraming resources sa West Philippine Sea na pwedeng maging main na dahilan kung bakit siya pupunta sa giyera magkipaglaban ng patayan sa US in case i-provoke ng US para pumunta dito. Anyway, hindi namin ito giyera, no? Hindi ito giyera ng manggagawa. At kung tatanungin niyo kami, paano i-avert itong giyerang ito? Ang sasabihin lang namin, i-avert natin itong giyerang ito at pinakamahalagang papel dito ng taong bayan kasama ng manggagawa, ang papel namin is just to say no. No to war. And in that case, dapat ang mga mamamayan sa China sabihin din, no to war. Dapat sa ganyang case din, dapat sabihin din ng mga mamamayan sa US, no to war. Bakit? Hindi natin ito giyera. No? Hindi natin ito giyera. So, yung posisyon na yan ay magiging permanenteng posisyon ng mga manggagawa hanggat ang giyerang ito ay hindi natatransform into sarili nating giyera. We have our own wars to win. And war of destruction, war of aggression was never been, never been a war for the working class. Pero ang mga biktima ng mga giyerang ito ay ang working class. They destroy, we suffer. And we will never allow that to continue to happen dahil sa extension ng politics na to, extension ng global politics na to, it's a war between superpowers. Okay? Hindi ako masyadong magtatagal, but I want to read a portion of our presentation done in October last year in France, where we were asked of our position on the ongoing war in Ukraine. So portion lang po ito para makita lang namin saan kami nanggagaling. No? Because the Philippines' dependence on imported fuel, the impact of the ongoing Russia-Ukraine/NATO war is unprecedented to our economy. Our inflation is highest in transport and electricity at more than 20%. Food inflation comes second as many of them are also imported. As such, wage values were greatly diminished, sending more workers into poverty. Yan ang impact ng Russia-Ukraine war. We always viewed war as an extension of imperial politics. There were trade wars and oil wars, and behind all of them were imperialist powers. Whom Lenin said ago, will keep on dividing and redividing this country. Russia's interest in Ukraine can only be defined by its economic interest of securing its European market for gas. In the same way, NATO's expansionism was surely driven by the same imperialist motive. In a similar situation, China's militarization of the West Philippine Sea is not only about securing its trade lanes against U.S. dominance in the Pacific Ocean, but also about the control of the oil and gas deposits underneath our disputed territory, with estimated trillions of dollars. And although this thing is getting played out by the recent more flammable war provocations between the U.S. and China on the issue of Taiwan independence, the same can be presumed that all turns and twists considered, the Ukraine war and China-US-Taiwan tension could trigger or blow up into another world war. Again, with prospect of more wars coming as global recession and the fight for market gets more intense, the old reality remains. These wars are not our wars. The working class has its own war to win, the war against exploitation and poverty and climate crisis. These are the wars that we need to wage within our countries and in solidarity with others, rather than us serving as production and foot soldiers to wars that never ours. Yan po yung aming ipinahayag sa isang konferensya sa Paris. At tingin namin, ganyan at ganyan ang mangyayari. So, maraming salamat doon sa mga naunang speakers. Meron pa kaming natutunan na iba pang mga detalye kaugnay ng ating existing foreign relations and how the new government is managing this kind of foreign relations. With our position being discussed in our own ranks, tingin po namin yung aming maliit na komunidad ay hindi sapat para pigilan ng gyerang ito. Mapipigil lang ito kung buong sambayan ng Pilipino, buong sambayan ng Chino, buong sambayan ng Amerikano ay sabay-sabay na magsasalita na no to war. Ganun lang natin ito mapipigil. Hindi ito pipigilin ng mga drivers, yung mga heads of states or ng mga generals na ang kanilang pananaw ay ang gyera ay siyang magdadala sa kanilang layunin para itulak yung kanilang mga sariling interes sa buong mundo. So yan lang po muna. Maraming salamat at magandang umaga po dito sa organizers ng forum na ito.
Thank, thank you very much to Wilson Fortaleza, spokesperson of Partido Manggagawa or Workers' Party. His appeal to the workers of the Philippines, China, and the United States to echo the no to war sentiments. Next, we'd like to invite for short opening statements, then we'll go to the question and answer. Mr. Herman Laurel. He is president of the Asian Century Philippine Strategic Studies Institute, columnist, geopolitics analyst, nationalist intellectual, Mr. Herman Laurel.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm very happy we have the guests that we have today, especially, of course, the very impassioned appeal of Sass Rogando for peace. Okay, and I provided everybody a set of some of my thoughts, including some of my creations, information spots or shots, and so on. So to summarize everything that I would want to say, but there are a few points that I need to add. Number one, China does not have to physically take over Taiwan. 40% of Taiwan's economy depends on China. President Xi Jinping has repeatedly said China will exert all efforts towards peaceful reunification. The Americans have suddenly accelerated everything because of what they saw last year during the Pelosi visit. And subsequent to that, the victory of the Kuomintang pro-China Unification Party, which is a reflection of what we can expect in the next presidential election in Taiwan in 2024, that it may go really the way of Kuomintang. So you can see the acceleration of the tempo for war by the United States. Number two, that being said, in Ukraine, the war started in 2014 because there are still those who cling to the idea that the special military operation of Russia into Ukraine is unjustified. No, NATO was plotting the dismemberment of Russia, and the words of Putin is very clear. This is an existential issue for Russia. If the West, the US and NATO pushes it, there will be nuclear war, which the US does not want. But US needs to expand the war from Europe to Asia. That is why Jens Stoltenberg is coming to Asia. Yeah. They need to expand it short of a nuclear world war, but they want a world war. For three reasons. They will not be able to stop inflation in the United States. Number two, the uncontrolled US debt. And number three, the collapse of the dollar due to the de-dollarization of the world economy. 25 countries have already started the process of de-dollarization. So America's hope is to escape all its responsibility for crisis in the world by upsetting the apple cart, short of a nuclear war, which will destroy the United States also. So, but responding to our colleague Wilson Fortaleza, we are in a war against hunger. But before we can succeed in a war against hunger, we must succeed in a war against war. But before the Philippines can contribute to the war against war, the Philippines must contribute in the war against the Mutual Defense Treaty, the Visiting Forces Agreement, and the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement. And these bases, 5 of the old bases, plus the 4. That is why I just want to read one more item that I think is very vital, which appeared in the American-funded news website Rappler, quoting Gregory Polling of the CIS. This time he's speaking for the CIS Center for Strategic and International Studies. Other times he's speaking for the AMTI, the Asia Maritime Transparency International, and a direct associate of the Strat-based Albert de Rosario Institute, Adrino. This is what is quoted by Rappler from the mouth of Gregory Pauling. Quote, access to sites in northern Luzon would help U.S. efforts to deter any Chinese move against Taiwan by putting the waters to the south of the island within range of shore-based missiles. What shore is that? Kundi the shore of Cagayan, the shores of Cagayan. So they are putting, now the final point ko, maraming points, but I want to keep it under 3 or 4 minutes. The next war is not a war of manpower. It is a war of missiles. Ukraine now is destroyed, wrecked by Russia because 70% of the war is being fought by bombs, artillery, and missiles and drones. And so the Philippines will not see a shadow of any Chinese soldiers here. But the missiles will announce themselves without a shadow to warn the Filipino people. This is the evil of the United States of America. Putang ina, may mga sundalo tayong mga general na nagpapatuta sa kanila. That's why I have my article here. Cowards before the American diktats. Our soldiers are very brave physically. But when it comes to America, the generals are cowards. I challenge the two mouths of the Americans in the retired military corps, officers corps natin. Rear Admiral Romel Jude Ong, you come out and face me in a debate here, or if you are afraid of me, face Ana Malindog-Uy. A sweet little child. And of course, Sasot is there, but they'll be afraid of Sasot siguro immediately.
They're afraid of her already.
And the columnist of the Manila Times, retired Brigadier General Edgar Arevalo. Kung matapang ka talaga, humarap ka kay Ana Malindog-Uy kung ayaw mo sa akin humarap. Because you are doing your country a disservice. You are not fulfilling your mission according to the Constitution to protect the people and the state. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you very much, Mr. Herman Laurel, for his opening statement. Very impassioned. Last but not the least, for a very short opening statement, because many people are eager with some questions, Professor Ana Malindog-Uy, she is a political science graduate, cum laude, University of the Philippines, now a PhD candidate in economics. She is also right now columnist in various publications, including Manila Times and other online sites. She is also Vice President for External Affairs of the Asian Century Philippines Strategic Studies Institute. Professor Ana Malindog-Uy, for your short opening statement.
Thank you, Wilson. To our media friends, thank you so much for coming. To our friends and colleagues in the Zoom and also in live stream, thank you very much also for attending this forum. To my colleagues here and nationalists, and passionate patriots and nationalists like Sass Rogando, Sec Abella, Mr. Herman Laurel, Wilson Flores, and also our friend in the Zoom from the Manggagawa or the workers sector. Thank you very much for coming and also for gracing this. And also Ann Wright from Hawaii, an anti-war activist, and also actually she was before one of the, was serving the U.S. government, but was not in agreement with the U.S. government during the invasion of Iraq. So that's already one indication that, there are a lot of American people as well who doesn't want a war with any country. It's more of the government policy rather than the American people's will, But since everyone already have said, actually I agree with Sass in every points that she actually said earlier, and of course with Sec Abella and also Mr. Herman Laurel. I guess my message to our kababayans, mga kabansa natin, mga kapwa Pilipino is, it's high time for us to actually choose. Ano ba talaga? If we are for peace or for war. Now, if we are for peace, then we need to speak against this new development and the change in foreign policy, then supposedly, yun ang prinamis sa atin ng ating mahal na Pangulo. Kasi nung eleksyon, binoto natin siya. Actually, I'll be honest with you also, no? Same with Sass. One of the main points why I actually supported PBBM and even campaigned for him in my own way. You know, Sass campaigned for him. I did also the same thing. But the thing here is, because of his foreign policy, that was the defining point. Kasi ang alam natin, iba nga ang foreign policy niya nung kampanya kay Lenny. Pero ngayon, bakit ganon? It's the same thing, or worst. Yun nga ang nababansagan si PBBM na Pinoy 2.0 or worst eh. So sana naman, kaado yun. Pero yun nga ang nababansagan sa kanya at yun ang lumalabas sa mga analysis ng ating mga experts sa foreign policy and even geopolitics. At sana naman makinig ang ating mahal na Pangulo sa boses ng bayan, ng mga tao. Hindi lang naman kami ito eh. If you look at social media, there are a lot of people who are against in the shift of the foreign policy of our president. At the end of the day kasi, kahit ano pang sabihin ng mga tao na may mga advisor siya, ito yung sulsul nito, at the end of the day, he is the sole author of or architect of our foreign policy. Nasa kanya ang bola. At gamitin niya yung power niya na hindi tayo malagay sa alanganin na sitwasyon. We should always think of our national interest. And I don't think being like what? Another target of China para lang maubos ang missile ng China, dumami-dami ang target ng China is our national interest. No, of course not. We have a lot of problem domestically. So yun siguro ang dapat maging focus niya at he tries to explain to the United States na hindi yun ang gusto namin. At hopefully naman siguro makinig siya sa tatay niya. Ang tatay niya ang isa sa mga example kung na pwede niyang tignan at sundan sa foreign policy. Kasi malinaw ang mga sinabi ng tatay niya nung mga 1975 pa eh. Yung 1975 na statement ng tatay niya, until now it applies. So why is it that he's deflecting from that? It's not good for the Philippines. It's not good for the people of this country. So ang panawagan ko rin sa ating mga kababayan is, you have to involve yourself in this issue. I agree also with Sass. Before sana nag-agree ang Pilipinas sa mga hinihingi sa atin ng United States, sinubject niya sana ito sa debate. Diba? There should be a public debate kasi ganito yon. Lahat ng Pilipino involved sa issue na to. Kung magkakaroon man ng problema, ang Pilipino ang unang nadadamay at ang unang maghihirap at ang unang apektado. So we are involved in this issue. It should have been subjected to a public debate, pero walang debate na nangyari. Hindi ko nga alam. Tinatanong ko nga nun, done deal na ba? Hindi pa done deal. Kasi tahimik ang presidente eh. Hindi siya nagsasalita. Ang nagsasalita, ang OIC natin sa defense, na Secretary Galvez na ngayon, noon si Faustino, then Department of Foreign Affairs. Pero ang Pangulo, most of the time, so quiet about these things. Why? Why not? Diba? Ikaw ang, ikaw ang pronta eh. Lahat ng mangyayari sa Pilipinas, nasa kamay niya yun. Now, if we will end up bomb, it's in his hands. So yun yung sinasabi ko. I really hope that the President listens to the voices of the people. At hindi lang sa amin, kundi yung mga tao na ayaw talaga sa ganitong foreign policy niya. I think it's not too late, no? Parang pinag-uusapan pa rin naman tong issue na to. So I hope PBBM will just, reflect then. At sometimes kailangan niya sigurong mag-isolate para yung mga voices na puro amboy at tuta ng Amerika, i-distance niya muna ang sarili niya, no? Para makapag-isip siya. And hindi lang naman yung mga taong yun dapat niyang pakinggan eh. May maraming tao pa ang dapat niyang pakinggan at siguro by doing that, baka mabago pa ang mga decisions niya. Hopefully, I'll be honest, I'm not too optimistic about this, but at the end of the day, I believe that there's always hope. Even sa darkest time, may hope pa rin. And I hope the Filipino people will not allow this. At the end of the day, tayo ang kawawa dito. So thank you very much, and I have a pleasant morning to everyone.
Thank you very much to Ms. Professor Anna Malindog-Uy and all the panelists here. We have time for question and answer. would like to request you to text your questions. There's a first request here. Ms. Corazon Valdez Fabros via Facebook Live and via Zoom. She's with the International Peace Bureau. Corazon Valdez Fabros said, can we request a copy of the paper of Ms. Sasot? I hope you can get a copy and please share to us because we need to share her ideas and also the statements of the other panelists, if possible, from Ms. Corazon Valdez Fabros. There's a question here for Ms. Ann Wright, for Colonel Ann Wright and the other speakers. From Mr. Burr Archivido, there will be an event in Washington, D.C. on February 19 called Rage Against the War Machine. And there will be parallel rallies to be held around the world the following weekend. I believe, Colonel Ann Wright, you are one of the speakers at this Washington, D.C. event. Also, my friend Diane Sare will be speaking. And her question is for Colonel Ann Wright and the other speakers. Colonel Ann Wright, my question is, how effective do you think are these anti-war rallies to prevent all these war scenarios? And are the American people finally waking up to the dangers of possible global nuclear war if the current madness continues without serious peace talks? Question of Mr. Burr Archivido for Colonel Ann Wright, and others can comment also. Can we? Wala. Yes. Can our panelists here answer? Can these anti-war rallies of people's organizations and these forums help?
Well, in the United States?
Yes, and here in the
in the
Philippines.
Philippines.
Yes, and Asia.
You know, there's only one way the Philippines could prevent being involved in a war. It is to declare our country a permanently neutral country. Switzerland is a permanently neutral country. Kung nasaan yung pera, ayoko na magsalita.
Thailand also, Ms.
Thailand
Sasot.
din.
Thailand got out of World War II, even though the Japanese passed through their territory to attack the British colonies of Malaysia. But very few casualties, Thailand, because neutral.
That's what you do. You declare your country a permanently neutral country.
Yes,
You don't-
yes.
You know, neutrality is not only, it's nothing new.
Yes.
The United States, for a long time in its history,
Was
was neutral
Even in
in
World War I.
wars. And its neutrality was very important in its development as a country.
Yes,
Pumasok
yes.
lang naman yan ng major war ng 1898
Yes.
sa atin. It launched its career as the global superpower in our country.
Using fake news, ma'am, di ba? Using fake news of the main bombing.
Marami pa, basta tirantado nila tayo. That's the truth of it. Huwag na nating hayaan tarantaduhin pa ulit nila tayo. Tinarantado na si Aguinaldo. Okay?
Yes.
Tinarantado na si Felipe Agoncillo, yung representative natin
yes,
dapat
in
sa
Paris.
Paris Commission. Tinarantado na yung mga Pilipinong pinagpapapatay. Tinarantado na yung mga Muslim sa Mindanao. Tinarantado na tayo ng panahon ng Hapon. Tinarantado na tayo yung party rights na yan. Diba? Hanggang ngayon ba, tatarantaduhin na tayo, anong petsa na? 2023 na. Yung pa rin yung problema natin, tinatarantado tayo ng mga Amerikano.
Ay, there's a question. Thank you, Ms.
Okay.
Sasot. Please introduce yourself to the panelists.
Amen ako doon
Yes,
Amen ako.
yes.
I would agree with Sass in every single word. Okay? Hanggang kailan ba talaga ang Pilipinas magiging neo-colonial ng Estados Unidos? Hahayaan mo ba yan? Hanggang what? Hanggang sa kaduluduluhan? Oh my God, that's so unfortunate for this country.
Thank you.
Sir, okay. Big
Pangalan
Suminta
niyo?
Cognet 25.
Yes.
Ma'am, anyway, thank you very much for the crash course on geopolitics and international policy. My question is, anybody from the panel, you supported BBM during his campaign in 2022 kasi nga yun sa kanyang promised foreign policy. So what is the reason behind why he reversed his foreign policy?
1,000 people asking that question. Thousands of people. Literally, ang daming mga nagte-text. Why? What happened? Can anyone please give theories? Why?
Anybody
Why?
from the panel?
Ano daw? Bakit?
Si Sir, oh. Si Sir Ad.
Yes. Short, Yes. Yes.
He has reversed his father's vision and promises of continuity with the Duterte program of government and his basic disagreement with EDCA when he was senator of the Republic. All of a sudden, after his Davos sortie in his travel program, he said that he re-entered Philippine politics in order to ensure the political survival of his family. With all the reversals mentioned in this forum, social media is replete. Would you therefore agree that the Americans has Bongbong by his balls to protect the Marcos hidden wealth in the U.S.? Would it be relevant to say that his action in abandoning our national security is because he made a deal with the Americans to secure the Marcos wealth? This must be exposed.
That is a question. Yes. Question
was a
mark sa dulo.
comment.
Yes.
That was a question daw.
With answer
No,
to my
that's-
question also.
Yes.
That's the,
Yes. Ay, sorry, may tanong ba dito? Pahabol.
unang-una, I think hindi naman lingid sa ating kaalaman na ang ating military establishment is very pro-American. Even Duterte, when he was president, he was very candid about this. A lot of our military officials went to school, studied in the United States, sponsored, etc. Wala namang masama dyan. Okay? Pero sana naman is magpaka-Pilipino naman kayo. Diba? Kasi sino bang unang isasalang? Anak nyo ba? Yung mga nasa Kongreso? Si Sandro ba? Ang ibaba, ang ipupronta sa Cagayan de Oro? Si Vince? Sino pa ba isa?
Ano pangalan? Si Lisa na lang.
Sila ba?
Si Lisa na lang.
Kayo ba yan? Malamang. Pagpaparating ng gera, aalis yan dito eh.
Si Lisa ba?
Di ba kayo ba? Yung pamilya nyo ba? Di ba? Gamit na gamit ninyo ang mga mangingisda, pero pag gera, sila rin. Di ba? Sabi nila, nandito para proteksyonan yung mga mangingisda. The United States will not launch a war over fish. Huwag tayo. Diyos ko, day. Sino ba? Saan itong nanggaling itong pag-iisip na ito? Di ba? Yun, the military establishment is very pro-American. Magpaka-Pilipino naman kayo. We are not asking you to be pro-Chinese. No one asking you to be like that. Di ba? Maybe you could revisit, no? This is a very controversial figure. Maybe you could revisit the work of the founder of AFP, Artemio Ricarte.
Oh, wow. Yes, nationalist.
Diba? Maybe you could revisit what he said there. It's still very relevant. Diba? Well, he was just accused of being a Japanese collaborator. but he is still the founder of the AFP. But he's a strong nationalist, no? Maybe you can learn a two with what he said.
Galing.
Di ba?
Antonio Luna pa. Antonio Luna. General Luna.
Diba? Ano bang ayoko na sinabi Antonio Luna, but that was what Antonio General Luna said was the opening of the Ponente of Justice Leonin when he dissented to the EDCA of Pinoy
Ah, wow.
in 2014.
Justice Leonen, ha? Wow.
Yes. Yan ang sa kanya mga brilliant moments, no? Yung
Wow.
dissenting opinion na yan. Diba? So, I think that's one of the major reason. And I think that the second reason is, I think we should ask ourselves, no? I think even President Duterte had difficulty dealing with the Americans, and not completely disengaging with them. Because we know that the Americans is the #1 intervener in domestic politics. Kaya yung presidente, takutin ka, ayaw mo, tanggal ka. Diba? Ano bang nadidetermina kung paano nagtatagumpay ang isang people power? Is it the number of people? Is it the support of the cabinet?
American intervention, ma'am.
Exactly. Diba? Bakit? Diba? I think BBM knows that, no?
Ma'am, because of neo-colonization or neo-colonialism injected to us, that is the reason behind this, is safe to say, na yan ang dahilan kung bakit ganyan ang mentalidad ng mga namumuno sa atin?
Yes po. Kaya nga, ang suggestion ko, kung ayaw nyo umalis sa ganitong patakarang ito, sana magkaroon ng patakaran na kayo ang mauuna. Para na magkagera, mawala na kayong lahat, mabago ng Pilipinas.
Pwede
Thank you. May nag-comment pala sa sinabi ni Ms. Sasot na maganda na many of our military leaders are educated in US and pro-American, but may sinabi siya magpagka-Pilipino. Si Jovito Salonga, Tanyada, and Diokno were American educated in Harvard and Yale. In fact, si Tanyada, Lorenzo Tanyada, one of the first Harvard graduates sa Pilipino, but they are pro-Philippines. And si Jose Diokno, the senator, the mother was an American, pero he was against U.S. military bases in the Philippines. You can be a nationalist now.
May
Yes.
dadagdag lang,
Mr.
lang ako.
Laurel.
Dahil madalas ko marinig ngayon, siguro nag-iingat, pati si Harry Roque narinig natin ito, no? Nag-iingat lang si PBBM, baka makudeta siya. But I think this is the opportunity for him to show his leadership. Imagine kung totoong 31 million ang bumoto sa kanya at siya ay bantaan ng Amerikano at ng military ng coup. Yang 31 million magiging 40, 50 million yan. Lalabas yan sa lansangan kung hindi siya duwag. Kung siya ay matapang, magkaroon ng tapang ngayon. Tulungan natin na talagang mamana niya yung tapang ng ama niya.
Question.
Yes. Ms. Barbara Mayda Kanay of Gulf News,
Yeah.
veteran journalist and nationalist.
Yeah,
And husband niya magaling na writer din, Alex Kanay.
Ang tatapang natin, no? I mean, I've seen this as an activist. Pero how come we could not put an end to the Mutual Defense Treaty? Even Duterte, who's so strong, was not able to do it. So even Senpeg said, hindi totoo yung anti-US statements nyo if you could not really go down to the basics of cutting off all these treaties. No? I note there's a question, how do we do it for all the panels? And another question is, I think the EDCA is very weak because it was not signed by the Defense Secretary of the US. It was signed by the Ambassador of the US. That's why kumurahin ni Duterte nun yung ambassador Sobra-sobra, no? I think we have to go down to the basics. Apart from going to the streets, we've done that before many times. We've lost lives. Why can't we really nail this colonialism. You know, we have to be really true anti-colonialist by going to the rules, no? To the law. So bakit di natin maalis yung Mutual Defense Treaty at saka EDCA at saka VFA?
Good
My question.
questions. Yes. Why can't we stop the mutual defense treaty? For our panelists to answer, anyone, can we have?
I'll start it off by
Yes.
saying that we have an entire ruling class, business, media, of course the military, and the political class that are playing with the Americans. We need a genuine popular movement to enforce this, and it can be done. I think this is the beginning. I think we can be inspired by what we have seen in Venezuela with Maduro, the return of Lula in Brazil, in Bolivia, the return of the forces of Evo Morales, and so on. It is going to be hard work on the part of the people, but there is no option. Our military is too much either cowardly or too much under the influence of the Americans. So I think these are hard decisions to make, but we have to make them as a nation, as a people. Maybe finally, this is the awakening that will come with this challenge we face now.
Thank you. Ganito, sa akin kasi, if you ask us now, of course we want the MDT to be abrogated. Ang pinaka, aside from abrogation, another option to that is revisit. Kasi maraming lopsided na provision ang MDT na hindi siya mutual. Supposed to be mutual siya, pero it's actually more favorable to the United States. So that there are two things there. Na sa panahon ni Digong, actually ginawa na. Even Defense Secretary Lorenzana was telling us and was telling the public before that dapat nire-revisit nga nila ang MDT. At titignan nila kung pwede i-renegotiate na magbabago yung mga provision doon na probably it's either hindi na siya applicable sa current situation or sense of time, so we do away with it, or i-revisit mo siya, babaguhin mo yung mga lopsided provision doon. Yun yung unang yun yung way on the part of the government. Doing it, you need to have that strong political will coming from the president. Hindi na si Digong ang nakaupo si PBBM na Ang sabi ni PBBM, magkikreate daw ng committee nung si Professor Carlos pa ang nasa NSA na i-review ang MDT, EDCA, and BFA. So, anong nangyari sa review? Kasi hindi naman ina-update ang publiko on that The public is not updated. Wala namang lumalabas okay, we're reviewing it, ito yung panel na nagre-review. Walang ganun Pero kung tatanungin mo kami, of course, we're always for the abrogation of BFA, MDT, and EDCA. Pero hindi kami nasa gobyerno We can only advocate. But the government, especially the president, has to have the balls and the political will to say, yes, we have to review it, or we have to revisit, or abrogate na natin yan. Kasi hindi na siya applicable sa sense of time. Or, lang yan makakagulo tayo dyan dahil dyan So yun yung problema.
Thank you.
Well, again, bakit hindi natin siya ma-abrogate? Because it's a military treaty. No, it's ang tagal-tagal. When was this? 1952. Okay? 51, sorry. The MDT is 1951. Again, our appeal to the military, magpaka-Pilipino kayo. Yun lang yun Kung Pilipino ka, maiintindihan mo na hindi mo kailangan yung mutual defense treaty na yan. Dahil yung treaty na yan, the balance of risk, okay, the balance of risk, anong hindi favorable sa atin? Sino ba sa ating dalawa ang mas pinakamaraming kaaway? Pilipinas o United States? So, ibig sabihin, ang probability na ma-activate tong treaty na to, na dadalhin mo ko sa gera, mas marami kaysa aakayin kita.
Yes.
Hindi ba ganun lang kasimple yun Can anyone from the military explain that to us? Okay? How is the balance of risk ng MDT na yan ay favorable to the Filipino people? Diba? So that's just what you, paliwanag nyo naman bakit ayaw nyo i-abrogate. Baka naman may maganda rin kayong rason. Diba? Pero pag nidebate yung MDT na yan, uungkatin, ano? Yung history ng treaty na yan. At pag naungkat nyo yan, makikita nyo, yung argumentation yan, noong niraratify yan sa US Senate, kung ano ang dahilan kung bakit gusto nila ng MDT. Ang isa sa mga major advocate yan noon ay isang Californian congressman. Okay? Sabi niya, senator, sorry, kailangan ipasa to kasi ayaw niya na ang gera ay aabot sa Californian shore. Eh, paano naman tayo? Kailan natin na hindi aabot sa Cagayan shore ang gera? Eh, nandiyan na yung target. Bakit hindi tayo maging katulad ng Vietnam? Okay? The Vietnam has 3 no's. Okay? No partaking in military alliances. No siding with one country to act against another. No foreign military bases in the Vietnamese territory or using Vietnam as leverage to counteract other countries, and no using force or threatening to use of force. Why can't we be Vietnam? Why do we need to be like the United States?
Gusto ko lang balikan yung tanong, no? Kung bakit. Eh, una-una, balikan na natin yung sinabi ni Joe Almonte. Ang isang kailangan talaga na Pilipinas sana ay isang confident national identity. Yung sinasabi ni Sass na magpaka-Pilipino tayo, pero hindi lang military. Tayo kasi Alam mo yung katulad na sinabi yung 31 million, pag talaga umalsa yan, kung talagang Pilipino yan, aalsa, may mangyayari. Kaya nga lang, kaya ako sinabi kanina, na ang ating long term talaga para ma-avert, hindi lang itong Ukraine situation, kundi kung ano pa mang darating pa, ay tayong lahat kailangan maging Pilipino, magkaroon tayo ng sentimiento at pagmamahal sa bayan. Yung nga ang wala. Alam ko na medyo pero saan mo kukunin yan? Saan ko kukunin ang hugot? Kailangan kasi manumbalik yung ating pagmamahal. Alam nyo, nasa DFA ako, nagkaroon ako ng revelation, epiphany. Nung kausap namin yung kausap namin yung mga Pilipino doon sa mga West Coast sa North America, assimilated na sila. Kanung-kano na sila. Alam nyo lang kung saan talaga Pilipino ang mga OFW. Doon sa Middle East, ang tawagan, kabayan. Now, of course, yung iba siguro, pero ang ibig ko sabihin, yung sentimiento ng pagka-Pilipino ay naiwan. Yun ang nawawala. Yun ang kailangan manumbalik. Yun ang kailangan ipangalandakan natin sa sarili natin, sa kasama natin, na kailangan magpaka-Pilipino tayo uli. Ngayon, no, I know it sounds romantic. It doesn't. No. Why, when Sass says that, how come Vietnam can say 1, 2, 3? It's not because they're smart. It's because they're truly Vietnamese. Why is it? Because, what about Thailand? Same thing. Ang nangyari kasi sa atin, masyado tayong clientelistic. Believe lang tayo, wala tayong politika, wala tayong believe lang tayo sa amo. Eh kailangan maging amo na natin sarili natin. Bumalik tayo sa ating pagka-sarili natin. So yun ang puntos ko. We need to regain a sense of a confident national identity. Yes, sir. Opo.
Sir, totoo po yun. Kaya lang kasi, they keep on insisting sa atin ng mga Americans, mayroon bang kinalaman yung geographical location natin in world geopolitics?
Sir, I'm not talking about geographically, we can be either, like I said earlier, an aircraft carrier of the Americans or a pearl in the South, in the China first line of defense. Pwede mangyari yan eh. Pero the key is not either US or America. It is whether we are pro-Philippines. Kailangan tayuan natin. Kayo, like for example, willing tayo, actually, ang hinahanap nila is warm bodies na yun na isasalang. Kung willing tayo na pumunta doon para saan? Kailangan kung maisasalang man, para sa sarili natin bayan. So geographically, yes, we are, actually I don't consider it a prisoner of geography. We are in a geographical sweet spot. We can play it to our advantage. We can use that and we can prevail and we can thrive and we can flourish if we say, I'm doing it for the Philippines and I am a Filipino and I will do that. That we need our leaders now, our legislative to do that, our executive to do that. And besides, all the civil society, pwede naman eh. Pressure your congressmen. Go to the Sangguniang Bayan. You know, go to local, may pwedeng sumali ang civil society. Doon sa level na yan eh. Meron 25% na pwedeng sumali sa mga local government. Ang puntos ko, kung man lang may nakikinig dyan sa labas at man lang lumiyab ang puso, ay man lang pumunta kayo doon sa ating mga local governments at doon makalandakan kayo, pagtulakan natin na mahalin natin ang Pilipinas. Salamat po.
I think yung question mo, yung ano sa atin na Amerika, may kinalaman ba sa kung yung geographical location natin? Well, yes, definitely. You know, I think we need to look at this historically. Kinuha tayo ng Amerika sa Spain. We're actually just an accidental. Ano lang tayo, hindi naman talaga tayo goal ng United States sa gera niya sa Spain. No? Ano lang siya na parang, ay, may Pilipinas pala dyan. Kaya maliit lang yung force nila dito nun eh. Nakipag-gera sila ng Spain eh. Ngayon, nandito sila, nakita nila, ang dami palang minerals. Ang dami palang ganito at malapit sa China. Eh, ang market noon, China. So they needed a gateway to China. Okay? So they want to take advantage of that trade. Ngayon, ang gusto naman nila, ngayon kaaway na ngayon nila yung China. So, di ba? So ano na ngayon tayo sa kanila? Dati gusto nila tayo dahil malapit tayo sa market sa China. Ngayon, gusto nila tayo dahil ano? Kasi ganito siya sa China, no? They don't need us anymore in order to go directly to ship directly to China. Para sa what? For what? Kasi they would like to have a presence in the South China Sea. Di ba? Eh ako naman, if you would like to have a presence in the South China Sea, why don't you talk to China, to Vietnam, and then ask them, can I have a presence in the South China Sea? Why do you need to use us as a proxy country in the South China Sea? And layo-layo mo sa South China Sea. You are not part of the South China Sea littoral state. Bakit mo pa pinagsisingitan yung sarili mo dito, United States? I would like to ask our military, why is a country, ilang miles away ba yan?
Yes.
Several miles away, pinagpipilitan yung nandito sa region natin. Di ba? I-explain ninyo dahil hindi nyo, di ba? That's their ano. And of course, they would like to have, you know, maybe maybe they would like to block the sea lane of communication in order to cripple China in case there's a war, a naval blockade of the Malacca Strait would cripple Chinese economy. Yes, sir.
The common reason the military has in preserving the Mutual Defense Treaty is access to military equipment and arms. But this is not true. The Philippines entered into 3 treaties with the United States around 1951. The first that has been abrogated is the Mutual Bases Agreement, ended in 1991. The second, the Mutual Defense Treaty, might end soon. But, I will go back to that. It is not a guarantee for the arms. The third treaty is the Mutual Assistance Pact. We can still live with the United States with the third treaty on the Mutual Assistance Pact. Now, what is burning the butts of the Americans nowadays is because the EDCA will terminate in April 28, 2024. And a 1-year notice is required for its extension and abrogation or abrogation. This is why they are drumming this issue up more than the reasons that have been given here. And with this new assets language appended to the EDCA agreement, this was decided and supported by the Supreme Court as constitutional because at that time it was said that it was merely an enforcement of the Mutual Defense Treaty. Should we therefore now abrogate EDCA and further into abrogating the Visiting Forces Agreement? And what has now transformed into a mutual offense treaty?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Adop Paglinawan. May tanong ba dito for our panelists from Ber Archibido? Question for Foreign Policy Analyst Ms. Sass Rogando Sasot and other panelists. Do you think President Marcos Jr. could still reverse his recent decision on EDCA, the additional 4 U.S. military bases? What must be done online and most importantly, I think, physically offline as citizens of the Philippines and as citizens of the world? What must we do to avert possible World War III? From Ber Archibido for Ms. Sass and others.
Well, you know, in the realm of possibility, everything is possible. You know, he can always do that kasi he's the chief architect of foreign policy eh. He can abrogate it. Pero ang tanong nga, kanina, sinabi ni Sir Herman, meron ka bang tapang na gawin? Diba? Meron ka bang tapang gawin na yan? Eh kasi pumasok-pasok ka bigla dyan eh. Eh paano ka lalabas? Eh alam mo naman ang Amerika, once binigay mo sa Amerika, mahirap nang bawiin yan. Ay nako.
Yes.
Eh di ba kailan natin sila napaalis sa
1991.
sa Clark? Eh katakot-takot pa ang nangyari nun sa, di ba?
Nagrally pa si Cory sa kalsada.
Di ba tanongin yung sina Nikki ko, sina Erap ko, anong pinagagawa sa kanila. Di ba? Tapos second, di ba, ngayon, pakiusapan nyo si BBM, you know, I think BBM should think about the legacy he would like to leave to the Filipino people. Forget about everything else. You know, what is that legacy? And that legacy is someone who actually rescued the Philippines from an impending tragedy.
Yes.
So do that.
Thank you. There's a question here from Coco Maximo. Agree with the panelists. We the Philippines, we are still pretty much, in reality, a colony of America. Our minds are colonized mostly by Western propaganda. Thank you for all your analysis and ideas, sabi ni Coco Maximo. And then there's a question here. How can we help the Philippines get out of this, what you mentioned earlier, possible Taiwan crisis, which has nothing to do with us? How can we do that now? At saka wala daw yan sa Mutual Defense Treaty, di ba? Sabi nung isang two questions here asking, Mutual Defense Treaty if a foreign country attacks US or Philippines. But Taiwan is not part of that treaty.
I just hope that they were listening. Okay? We are, and the American analysts are proud to say, na dadami na ang target ng China. O di, pag inatake na tayo ng China, edi pasok na tayo sa MDT. Ganun kasimple. Di ba, paano tayo alis? I think, alam nyo yung pelikulang Don't Look Up. Para tayo nasa Don't Look Up na pelikula eh. No? We are warning an impending tragedy and the people are better yet talking about Alex Gonzaga's ice cream and whatever.
Oh.
To be honest, I'm just gonna be frank with you. More or less, a lot of you will die.
There's a question here for Sass from editor of Bulgar newspaper, Miss Janice Nabida, watching via Zoom. Thank you daw to all the panelists. Sabi ni Miss Janice Nabida, editor of Bulgar tabloid newspaper. Miss Sass, how will you describe PBBM then when you campaigned for him, and how will you and his silence now over this controversy from Miss Janice Nabida of Bulgar newspaper editor.
I think silence during the campaign period was a good strategic choice. But now, it is a tragic choice. No? The more you are silent about this, no, especially na, my God, pinangangalanda ka ng mga Amerikano na ito pala ang kanilang plano. Ito pala, ang kulang na lang sa Amerika, kailan sila makikipaggera. Huwag naman nahimik. Ano pa bang inihintay? Maghihintay pa ba tayo ng 2025, yung deadline nila in 10 years? Eh, pulpos na. Magsalita na. So yung sinasabi ng magagawa natin, well, ano magagawa nyo? Di mag-ingay kayo. Kausapin nyo yung mga congressman nyo. You know, not just adults, even kids. My God, this is the future of your kids, no? Just maybe some of you will already be dead in 10 years, 2 years, 5 years. E paano yung mga apo ninyo? Do you want them to live in that kind of war situation?
Wilson.
Yes, there's an American comment here. Sabi niya, Henry Brown said, the Philippines is strategically important to the U.S. The Filipino people are not. And never forget that the Yankees murdered millions of people during and after the Spanish-American War here in the Philippines. From Henry Brown via
Yes.
online.
So my final word for today's event. Number one, look at Ukraine. Half of the population is outside their own homes already. 10 million are outside Ukraine. Its poverty rate has tripled and expected to grow even further. Despite Western propaganda about Ukraine winning, many analysts, even American analysts, believe by August, September, it will be over. We may not see a Ukraine state after that. Now, I'll make several humble propositions and promises. We have been discussing these following projects. We are planning a peace and development concert for the youth to start off a campaign, to launch a campaign, to start a campaign for anti-war, a peace campaign, anti-war campaign in the next few weeks. Expect at least every other week media fora or media forums here at Kamuning Bakery on this issue. So we just need to keep telling the people, reaching out to the people with this message, explain to the people what the media is not explaining sufficiently. I believe when understood, the nation will rise up and do the right thing. And the PBBM hopefully will listen and gain the courage if he sees the courage from the nation itself.
Thank you. We'd like to invite, since it's 12 o'clock, we will serve lunch. We'd like to request closing statement from our panelists. After Mr. Laurel, Ms. Anna Malindog-Uy, based on geography, not based on age or rank. So, nauna si Mr. Laurel, next si Ms. Professor Anna Malindog-Uy to wrap up her thoughts about this.
Question.
Sige, question mo
May
naman.
question ba?
Sige,
Yes.
ma'am, question mo.
Yes.
Why can't we make all these statements in Tagalog? Kasi,
Ay, maganda. We have some foreign media watching via Zoom
Yeah, I know.
now.
But
But
that-
very good idea
No,
for
because-
general public.
the people should understand that the fight is not really against presidents or congressmen. It's against the US and they have to understand it that way. Yung bang colonial issue kasi ito eh.
Ang maganda sinasabi ni Ms.
Although dapat neo-colonial na tayo.
Sabi niya,
we have to get out of it talaga.
maraming salamat. We'll do it. Very great idea ni Ms. Barbara Media-Canay. Gawin natin bilingual ito. Pag may nag-i-English, itatagalog.
English lang para marinig din abroad. But
Yes.
what I'm saying, the statements of the people, our
Can be
panelists,
translated into Tagalog also.
kasi
in
di
Filipino.
maintindihan ng tao eh.
Maganda yan.
Yung, even if ang tagal-tagal lang ini-explain ng the leftist or what, no?
Baka closing statement natin, i-Filipino part of it. Magandang idea, Miss Barbara Media-Canay. Yes, maganda. And also, the statement can be translated into Filipino. Maraming salamat kay Miss Barbara Mita. Magsasalita ngayon si Miss Ana Malindog-Uy. In English, I'll translate to Tagalog. Pwede.
It's okay. Tatagalog ako. May isa pa palang issue na dapat nating bantayan, no? Aside from the fact that we're calling for, the abrogation or of the military agreements and treaties with the United States, there's one more issue na hindi natin dapat tantanan at kailangan nating i-monitor. President Bongbong Marcos going to Japan. Okay?
BFA with Japan.
And don't forget, Japan is an ally of the United States in every sense, especially military. At the same time, if you look at what Japan is doing, it's rearming. 2% already of its GDP is allotted to what? To military and defense in terms of rearming. And it's actually right now double na, no? Nagdoble na. Tapos, mayroon siyang bagong mga negotiations at agreements, defense and military-wise with UK, of course with the United States. Inihila-hila din nila ang South Korea and India on the other side. Especially US is talking to India for another military and defense agreement. Of course, the target is always China. And then tayo kasama dun kasi dito nga yung EDCA natin, may enhanced patrol in the West Philippine Sea, another provocation, mayroon kang deployment of troops, no? Pero very critical din ang magiging possible military and defense agreement with Japan ng Pilipinas. Kasi kung makikita mo, may possibility na parang BFA yan or EDCA. Repositioning or prepositioning of Japanese troops in the Philippines and even military asset. Ang tanong, hahayaan ba natin to? Kailan ba ang last na nandito ang Japanese soldiers? Second World War, and that was like a devastating war for the Philippines. So, tingnan natin din itong darating na trip ni PBBM sa Japan. Tingnan natin kung anong mangyayari dun sa mga planchado na mga agreement na pipirmahan niya or pipirmahan ng Defense Bureau natin dito sa Pilipinas. So kasi kung titignan nyo, malaki ang papel niyan, kung malaki ang role ng mangyayari dyan, when you talk about yung ine-explain kanina ni Sass na impending war between the United States and China. Na may mga certain dates na nilagay ang year pala ang US, 2025, 2027, and probably ang mas late dyan, within 10 years, probably 2030 or 2033. So, yun. So, tignan natin yan at sana ay yung ating media, i-report natin to. Kasi ngayon, parang feeling ko, may news blackout pagdating sa EDCA. Hindi ganun na i-explain, hindi ganun na i-expose yan eh. May mga kolumnista na nag-e-expose at nag-e-explain kung ano ang negative adverse effect nito sa Pilipinas. But hindi lahat, no? Wala kang news na makikita masyado eh. So sana itong impending trip niya sa Japan, tutukan din natin. That's another thing that we really have, as much as possible, prevent na magkaroon ng another SOFA or another BFA, no? With Japan. Yun lang po.
Thank you very much. Short translation for foreign media. Professor Ana Malindog-Uy is asking us to watch out for the state visit to Japan of President Bongbong Marcos about the danger of possible visiting forces agreement with Japan to add another foreign military presence in the country, which she said we should remember is a possible danger. Ms. Sass Sasot earlier already cited many U.S. sources saying war is possible between U.S. and China over Taiwan and other issues. Thank you. Next, for our closing statement, Ms. Sass Rogando Sasot.
Grabe naman yung may VFA sa Japan. Lahat na sila nandito. Ibenta na natin yung Pilipinas sa kanila. I think I have 3 points to make. First is to the Westerners, no? Even to the Western media and Western commentators and analysts, could you please stop referring to our country in colonial terms, like asset? real estate. We are a sovereign country, no? And can you imagine if they use it, if they use sovereign country, the sentence now becomes awkward. The United States acquired a new sovereign country. Diba? Stop referring us in colonial terms. Second, to the Filipino people, stop buying this, really American line of thinking that if you are not with them, you're against them. And this choose between China and United States, that's a very binary way of thinking that has a very Western origin. Okay? Again, the choice is not between China or the United States. The choice for the Philippines is between being a pawn, P-A-W-N, and being a sovereign. And lastly, heroes are often those who emerged triumphant after a tragedy. But the greater hero is the one who prevented a tragedy from happening in the first place. So Mr. President Ferdinand Marcos Jr., be that hero for our country. Huwag ka nang magpakatuta sa Amerikano.
Maraming salamat. Short translation in Tagalog, sabi ni Sass, sa mga Western media, wag daw tawagin ng Pilipinas na asset or real estate. Sariling bansa ang Pilipinas, sovereign. Number two, para sa mga tao natin dito sa bayan natin sa Pilipinas, wag tayong maniwala sa American propaganda or line na ang pagpipilian natin daw ay kampi pa tayo sa Amerika o kalaban natin Amerika. Hindi yun ang choice natin. Tapos ang choice daw hindi US laban sa China kung saan tayo kakampi. Ang choice natin daw, sabi ni Ms. Sass Sasot, magiging tuta pa tayo o independent na bansa. Tapos ang magandang pangatlong point ni Ms. Sass Sasot, sabi niya, kadalasan daw ang mga bayani daw lumalabas pagtatapos ng trahedya. Pero ang totoong magaling na bayani daw ay yung magpapahinto ng trahedya. Yun, para hindi mangyari yung trahedya, yun ang totoong bayani. Tapos sabi ni Ms. Sass Sasot, ang appeal niya kay Pangulong Bongbong Marcos, sana siya ang maging bayani ng kasaysayan natin sa Pilipinas. I-prevent niya ang gera na mas angkot tayo doon. Last but not the least, for closing statement, Mr. Ernie Abella, statesman, diplomat.
Ang huling sinabi ni Ms. Sassy tungkol sa pagkabayani. Siguro kailangan natin na matauhan tayo na wag na natin, tama naman, dapat may liderato na kailangan maging bayani. Pero at the end of the day, ang kailangan tumayo na maging bayani ay ang sambayan ng Pilipino. Panahon na po na tumayo tayo, hindi dahil sa ideolohiya, kundi dahil sa pagmamahal sa bayan. What we need is an awakened Filipino spirit. Kailangan mabago ang Pilipino at ipaglaban natin ang bayang Pilipinas. Hindi po ito isang ideolohiya, kundi po bumabalik lang po tayo sa pagmamahal sa bayan dahil atin po ito at lahat ng mga kaya po nating harapin kahit na sino. Tumayo lang tayo. Salamat.
Thank you very much to Ernie Abella. Short translation in English. He said he agrees with Ms. Sass Sasot appealing to the President to be a hero, but he also hopes the ultimate hero should be us, the Filipino people, change our mindset, be independent-minded, uphold Filipino national interest, not ideologies and wrong ideas. And he said ultimately, we should stand up for what is true Filipino national interest. So once again, thank you to our outstanding and enlightened speakers, Colonel Ann Wright of the International Peace Bureau, She's based in Hawaii. Ernesto Abella, thank you very much. Mr. Wilson Fortaleza, thank you from Partido Manggagawa. We have also, of course, Ms. Sass Rogando Sasot, fearless and eloquent analyst and book author who should be in the Senate in the future. And also, we have Mr. Herman Laurel and Professor Anna Malindog-Uy. People also saying we should, in the future, Ernesto Abella should run again. We need to elevate the quality of politics in the Philippines with ideas like people in our panelists. And our short message lang from Pandesal Forum, we'd like to request everyone to please propagate the ideas of the analysts here, help change the mindset of people and our media friends. And also, we should wage war against violence, against militarization, and war against wrong propaganda. And also here at Pandesal Forum, we would like to quote, kasi nasa tabi ko si Mr. Abella, a former minister of the church. Sabi sa Bible, if people throw stones or rocks or threaten to throw stones or rocks, let us throw pandesal. And sabi sa Bible, I'm not a religious person, but I'm beside a former religious minister. Sabi sa Bible, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called the children of God. So, dito sa Pandesal Forum ng Kamuning Bakery Cafe, tama ba yung phrase? Walang masamang tinapay. Yes. Yes. Tsaka walang imposible daw sa walang matigas na pandesal sa mainit na kape. Thank you.